Hi everyone. I got lucky. I found a book of Premchand's stories translated in English. It's a collection of short stories. Just perfect for those who do not understand Hindi but who might be interested or might be curious to know why Premchand is held in such high regard. Why is uh, Premchand almost like India's Shakespeare? So I'm going to read a story which I really enjoyed reading. Actually, I enjoyed reading all of them. So eventually I'll get there. I'll be reading all of them. But I'm going to start with this. The title is Theft. Ah, childhood. Can I ever forget you? That broken house of mud, that bed of straw, those days spent wandering the fields barefoot and bare-bodied, or climbing mango trees. All of it appears once more before my eyes. The pleasure I then felt at wearing coarse country made footwear, I never feel now, not even when I wear flex boots. The delight of that sugarcane juice cannot be matched even by rose sherbet now. The joys of parched grain and wild berries are not to be found today, even in grapes and the finest sweets. I used to go with Haldar, the son of my father's younger brother, to study at a school run by a Maulvi Sahib in another village. I was 8 years old. Haldar, who is now in heaven, was 2 years older than I. We would eat stale rotis early in the morning and set out, carrying peas and parched millet for lunch. Then the whole day was ours. Neither did Maulvi Sahib maintain an attendance register, nor were absentees fined. So what was there to fear? Sometimes we would stand outside the police station and watch the policemen parading. Other times we would spend the day following a man with a performing bear or monkey. Or we would go off to the railway station and watch the trains. We were probably better informed about the train timings than even the timetable was. A city businessman was having a house built. A well was being dug there. That too was an interesting entertainment for us. The gardener was kind to us and would let us sit in his hut. We would insist on helping with his tasks, watering the plants with a bucket, weeding the beds, and trimming the creepers with a pair of scissors. What delightful tasks! The gardener had a thorough understanding of children. He would get us to do his work, as if he was doing us a favor. We would do as much work in an hour as he did in a whole day. The gardener is no more, but the garden is still green. When I pass it, I feel like embracing the trees, weeping and saying, "Dear ones, you have forgotten me, but I haven't forgotten you. Your memory is still green in my heart, as green as your leaves. You are the living embodiments of selfless love." Sometimes we would be absent from school for weeks, but our excuses were so well thought out that Maulvi Sahib's frowns would soon clear up. If I had that power of imagination today, I would write a novel that would astound people. Now I have to work really hard to invent a story. Well, our Maulvi Sahib was a tailor. He taught on the side. We used to sing his praises to the potters and oilmen of our village. We were the Maulvi Sahib's roving agents. When the Maulvi got some work because of our efforts, we were very pleased. When we could not come up with an excuse for our absence, we would take a present for Maulvi Sahib. We would gather a seer or half a seer of beans, 5 or 10 sugarcane sticks, some green stalks of millet or wheat. Maulvi Sahib's anger would subside when he saw these gifts. When it was not the season for these crops, we would think of some other way to escape punishment. Maulvi Sahib reared birds as a hobby. Cages of nightingales, larks, and other local singing birds hung in our schoolroom. Whether or not we learnt our lessons, the birds always learnt them. They studied along with us. We greatly enjoyed grinding chickpea powder for these birds. Maulvi Sahib often requested the boys to catch moths. These birds loved to eat moths. Sometimes we would divert disaster from our heads to those of the moths. We would sacrifice them to placate Maulvi Sahib. One morning, when we were at the pond to wash our faces, Haldar showed me something white hidden in his fist. I leapt forward and opened his fist to find a rupee there. Surprised, I asked, "Where did you get this rupee?" Haldar said, "Amma had kept it in the niche. I stood on the string cart and took it." We had no trunk or cupboard at home. Money was kept in a niche high up on the wall. Chachaji had sold the hemp crop the day before and kept the money to pay the landlord. Somehow, Haldar had found out about it. When all the family members were busy working, he set up his cot, climbed on it, and took out a rupee. Until then, we had never touched money. I well remember the waves of delight and fear that ran through my heart on seeing that rupee. A rupee was an unobtainable object for us. Maulvi Sahib got only 12 annas a month from our family. At the end of the month, Chachaji himself went to pay him the money. Who could imagine our pride? But the fear of a beating clouded our joy. No doubt the money had been carefully counted. The theft would definitely be discovered. Haldar had experienced Chacha's wrath before, although I had not. There was not a simpler man in the world than he. Had Chachi not assumed the responsibility of protecting him, any merchant could have sold him in the market. But when he got angry, he would listen to no one. Even Chachi was afraid of his wrath. We both reflected on these matters for some time and finally decided that when Lakshmi comes, one should not let her go. For one thing, they would not suspect us, and if they did, we would flatly deny it. We would say, "What would we do with the rupee?" Had we given it a little more thought, we would have changed our minds, and the bizarre drama that ensued wouldn't have taken place. But at that time, we did not have the ability to think calmly. We washed our hands and faces, came home, and set foot inside with trepidation. Because if a search had been conducted right then, only God could have saved us. But everyone was busy with the day's work. No one spoke to us. We didn't have breakfast or take our lunch with us. We just picked up our books and set out for school. It was the rainy season. The sky was overcast with clouds. We both went along, filled with glee. I doubt that I would feel as glad today, even if I got a place in the Council of Ministers. We made hundreds of plans and built hundreds of castles in the air. This opportunity had come our way by great good fortune. We would probably never get another in our lives, so we wanted to make the money last as many days as possible. Although in those days one could buy very good sweets for 5 annas a seher, and half a seher would probably have been enough to stuff us both. We still feared that eating sweets would mean using up the rupee in one day. We ought to eat something cheap that would be tasty, fill our stomachs, but not cost much. Finally, we saw some guavas. We both agreed on them. We filled our pockets with guavas for just 2 paise. When Haldar handed the rupee to the vendor, she looked at it suspiciously and asked, "Where did you get this rupee, son? You didn't steal it, did you?" We had an answer ready. We had, after all, read 2 or 3 books. Scholarship had not left us untouched. I immediately said, "We have to pay Maulvi Sahib's fees. There was no change at home, so Chachaji gave us a rupee." This allayed her suspicions. We both sat on a culvert and ate lots of guavas. But what would we do now with 15.5 annas in coins? It was not difficult to hide a rupee, but where could we hide this heap of coins? There was no way to conceal it in our waistbands or our pockets. To keep these coins was to proclaim our theft aloud. After much thought, we decided to give 12 annas to Maulvi Sahib and eat sweets with the remaining 3.5 annas. Having made this decision, we proceeded to school. It was our first appearance there in several days. Maulvi Sahib said angrily, "Where have you been all these days?" I said, "Maulvi Sahib, there was a death in the family." Saying this, I placed 12 annas before him. Why would he make further inquiries? He was delighted to see the money. There were several days to go before the end of the month. Normally, after the new month began, he would have to demand his fees several times before he got it. Thus, it was quite natural for him to be very pleased to get the money so soon. We looked at the other boys with a sense of superiority, as if to say, "You don't pay even when asked, but we pay in advance." We were still reading the lesson when we discovered that there was a fair at the lake, so we would be let off early in the afternoon. Maulvi Sahib would take his nightingales to the fair to participate in competitions. We were thrilled to hear this. We had already deposited 12 annas in the bank, so now we decided to spend 3.5 annas at the fair. We would have a great time. We would eat sweets, gorge on golgappas, ride the swings, and go home in the evening. But Maulvi Sahib had strictly ordained that all the boys must recite the lesson before school ended. Whoever could not recite it would not be allowed to go. The result was that I was let off, but Haldar had to stay back. Several other boys who had recited the lesson set out for the fair. I joined them. The money was with me, so I didn't wait for Haldar. We decided that he would come to the fair as soon as he was released, and we would enjoy it together. I had promised him that I would not spend a paisa until he came, but little did we know that ill luck was preparing another scenario for us. I spent over an hour at the fair, but there was no sign of Haldar. Had Maulvi Sahib not let him off yet, or had he lost his way? I kept gazing at the road. It was no fun being at the fair alone. I also wondered whether the theft had been discovered and Chachaji had got hold of Haldar and taken him back home. Finally, when evening fell, I ate a few sweets, put Haldar's share of money in my pocket, and slowly set off for home. On the way, I thought I might as well go via the school. Haldar might still be there, but the school was deserted. I did, however, meet a boy who was playing there. When he saw me, he burst out laughing and said, "Go home, dear, and see what a good hiding awaits you. Your uncle came. He took Haldar away, beating him all the way. He gave him such a blow with his fist that Mr. Haldar fell flat on his face. Then he dragged him off. You had paid Maulvi Sahib's fees? He took that back too. Think up an excuse, otherwise you had it." I grew cold with terror and felt as if blood had dried up in my body. What I feared had happened. My feet felt heavy as lead. I could barely lift them as I trudged homeward. I promised offerings of sweets to every god and goddess whose name I remembered. Laddus to one, pedas to another, batashas to a third. As I approached the village, I paid homage to the village spirit, because the spirit's wishes reign supreme in its own territory. I did all this, yet as I drew nearer home, my heart beat louder and louder. Above, heavy clouds gathered and rolled. It felt as if skies were about to burst open and fall. I saw people quit work and run towards their homes. The cattle too were homeward bound, jumping around, their tails raised high. The birds were flying to their nests. But I walked on at the same slow pace as if my legs had lost their strength. I wished I could get high fever or get injured somehow, but the washerman does not mount his donkey when told to do so. Death does not come when called for, so why should sickness? Nothing happened. And although I walked as slowly as I could, I finally reached home. What could I do now? There was a large tamarind tree at our door. I hid behind it, hoping that when it grew somewhat darker, I could slip in and hide under my mother's bed. When everyone went to sleep, I would cry and tell my mother the whole story. Mother never beat me. If I shed a few fake tears before her, she would melt. Once I got through the night, I would be safe. By morning, everyone would have cooled down. But Providence had something else in store. A boy saw me and ran straight to my house, calling out my name over and over. Now there was no hope for me. I entered the house helplessly, and a shriek escaped my lips, like the yelp of a beaten dog who sees someone approaching it. Father was sitting in the outer room. In those days, he was not keeping well. He had taken leave and come home. I don't know what his ailment was, but he ate moong dal, and in the evening he poured something from a bottle into a glass tumbler and kept drinking it. It was probably a medicine recommended by an experienced doctor. Medicines always taste bitter and unpleasant. This medicine was no exception, but for some reason, Father enjoyed drinking it. When I took medicine, I would shut my eyes and swallow it in one gulp, but perhaps this medicine took effect only when drunk slowly. 2 or 3 other invalids from the village, and sometimes even 3 or 4, gathered to sit with my father, and they all drank medicine together for hours. It was difficult to get them to stop even for dinner. When I arrived, these patients had gathered and were drinking medicine. When father saw me, his eyes glowed and he said, "Where were you all this time?" I said in a low voice, "Nowhere." "Now you have taken to stealing. Did you steal the rupee or not?" I couldn't speak. A naked sword was dancing before me. I was too afraid to utter a word. Father asked again, fiercely, "Why don't you speak? Did you steal the rupee or not?" Holding my life in my hands, as it were, I said, "When did I—" Before I could finish, father leapt up ferociously, gritted his teeth, and came towards me with upraised hand. I screamed aloud and started crying. I shouted so loud that my father was taken aback. His upraised hand froze midair. Perhaps he thought that since I was already in such a wretched condition, I would die if I was slapped. Realizing that my strategy was paying off, I yelled and wailed even louder. A couple of father's friends got hold of him and gestured to me to run away. Children often make the mistake of continuing their tantrums in such a situation and get beaten for nothing. I was too wise for that. But the scene inside was even more terrifying. My blood ran cold. Haldar was tied to a pillar. His whole body was covered in dust, and he was still sobbing. He seemed to have rolled all over the courtyard. The courtyard had apparently got drenched with his tears. Chachi was scolding Haldar, and Amma was grinding spices. Chachi was the first to see me. She said, "Oh, here he is too. Speak up. Did you steal the rupee or did he?" I said with aplomb, "Haldar did." Mother said, "If he stole it, why didn't you come home and tell someone?" Now it was hard to avoid telling a lie. I think that when a man's life is in danger, to lie is pardonable. Haldar was used to being beaten. A few more blows would make no difference to him. I had never been hit. A couple of blows would finish me off. And Haldar had surely tried to save himself by implicating me. Else why had Chachi asked whether I had stolen the rupee? Although my lying at this moment could in no way be called praiseworthy, it was certainly pardonable. I immediately said, "Haldar threatened to beat me if I told anyone." Amma said, "See, it's just as I said. I said the child has no such habit. He never touches money, but everyone thought I was a fool." Haldar said, "When did I say I would beat you?" I said, "There, by the pond." Haldar said again, "Amma, it's a lie." Chachi said, "It's not a lie, it's the truth. You are a liar and the rest of the world is truthful. You were the one caught, after all. If your father had a job, earned money and brought it home, and was respected in society, you too would be considered truthful. But as it is, you are a liar. The one in whose fate sweets were written has eaten sweets. Your fate has nothing but kicks in store for you." So saying, Chachi untied Haldar, took his hand and led him inside. By affectionately defending me, Amma had unwittingly turned the tables. Otherwise, the poor fellow might have been beaten much more. I sat down by Amma and held forth on my innocence. My simple-hearted mother thought me the embodiment of truth. She was fully convinced that Haldar was entirely to blame. Some time later, I came out of her room with gur and parched grain. Haldar too emerged at the same moment, eating parched rice. We went outside together and began to recount our experiences. My story was happy, and Haldar's sad, but both concluded the same way, with gur and parched grain.